B2B Cambodia, the portal for business use in Cambodia.
I'm B2B Cambodia's Darshana. Thanks for watching. Today I'll be speaking with Ms. Chandavya Ing, Associate at Tilleke Gibbins, about data protection in Cambodia. Hello, Chandavya. Thank you so much for having us here today at the Tilleke Gibbins office. I'm really looking forward to learning more about data protection in Cambodia.
Hi, thank you so much, Dash, for visiting us, and it's our pleasure to provide some of the insight on this topic.
Great, thank you so much. So to start off, could you begin by explaining the concept of personal data? What is it?
Currently, there is no definition of the term personal data under any regulation or law. There is, of course, the definition of the term data under the e-commerce law, the term personal identification data and personal private information under the subdegree on management, use and protection of personal identification data. Still, there's no definition of the term personal data. But based on the literal meaning of this term, I think it could refer to any type of information that could identify a person.
And can you elaborate a little bit more on which laws and regulations apply to personal data in Cambodia?
Well, currently there is no comprehensive data protection law. The Ministry of Post and Telecommunication is still drafting this legislation. And from what we understand from a press release is that they just hold a consultation workshop on this draft law at the end of the 2024.
And since there is no specific law yet, what are the sort of implications of the current regulations here in Cambodia regarding like data protection and privacy?
Currently, matters pertaining to data protection and privacy broadly fall under the scope of the right to privacy, as well as some of the obligation of professional secrecy, which have been mentioned under the Cambodia Constitution, certain provision under the Civil Code and Criminal Code, as well as some sectoral law like the e-commerce law, as well as the law on banking and finance institutions. And this law generally provide protection to the right to privacy and the obligation of professional secrecy that could potentially cover as well as protect the personal data to some extent.
I see. And in terms of the industry-specific laws that you mentioned, especially like in banking and finance, what are the implications of like the data retention as well as the protection and storage? Can you share a little bit on that?
Sure. So for data retention, I think it would depend on which sector we are in. So because there is no law that set a general data retention period, and not all sectoral law mention about data retention period as well. So for example, if we're talking about credit reporting, there is a regulation that mentioned that all data of the customer have to be retained for at least 5 years after the account has been closed. And if we talk about tax, the accounting record and tax invoice shall be retained for at least 10 years. So it depends on the sectors that you are in. And in terms of the protection, actually, as I mentioned, mostly the protection currently is based on the right to privacy and the obligation of professional secrecy. So for example, if we look into the law of banking, we could see that there is a prohibition of people in certain professions from providing confidential information relating to accounting statement. And if you look into the telecom law, for example, they mention that they generally recognize the privacy of the subscriber in telecom services.
And can you also explain a little bit about the consent requirements that are maybe involved in the collection and processing of data, personal data here in Cambodia?
Well, because there is no comprehensive law, I could say that there's no consent requirement that have been regulated yet. And when I'm talking about consent requirement here, I'm referring to the notification requirement, like how and when should one notify the data subject of the processing of data, as well as whether the data subject have the right to withdraw and how can they do that. And of course, there's no regulation that set those kind of requirements. But in practice, most companies prefer to obtain consent from data subject, be it a written form or electronic form, before they process the personal data. And as you may have known, like whenever we have to click on the agree button in order to access to some certain service, and that button will link to the term and condition that contain a clause on personal data.
So of course, in today's time, a very tech-driven time, and everything has now shifted a lot to like cloud and AI, for example. So what that means is that many tech companies, but also other businesses in general, are now having to store and process a lot more data than before. With this in mind, legally speaking, can personal data be collected in Cambodia, and can it be transferred or stored abroad?
Well, There is no regulation that restricts the transfer and storage of data abroad except for banking and financial sector. So for that sector, for example, the licensed banks and financial institutions are required under the technology management guideline to notify the National Bank of Cambodia when there is an extensive sharing of data across geographic location and when the data is stored or processed abroad. So if you ask to what extent the term extensive means, the guideline does not address this issue though.
But has there been any new developments maybe in like the development of domestic storage facilities, for example?
Actually, according to the press release, the Ministry of Post and Telecommunication has just begun the construction of the National Data Center, which will be classified as Tier 4, the highest classification of data center. So I think we are moving toward an exciting era of digital development in Cambodia.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Chandavya. It was a pleasure learning more about personal data protection here in Cambodia.
Sure, it's our pleasure.
You've been with B2B Cambodia. Thanks for watching. Join us next time as we continue to bring you more news, updates, and developments from the business community in the Kingdom of Cambodia.